My name is Billy Robertson, 60 years old, and I raised my son Michael alone since he was 7 after my wife passed away. For 28 years, I gave him everything I possibly could. I worked multiple jobs so he could have opportunities I never had. This Christmas, Michael gave his mother-in-law a $50,000 BMW with a big red bow. My gift was a $5 blanket with the clearance sticker still attached. While I share what happened that Christmas morning and what I left on their doorstep later, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt undervalued by someone you gave everything to. Before everything changed, I had a simple but happy life. Sarah and I met in college, got married right after graduation, and welcomed Michael into the world 2 years later. I worked as a structural engineer at a growing firm, and Sarah taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had a comfortable 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood with decent schools. Our life wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love and laughter. Sarah was the kind of person who lit up any room she entered. She had this contagious laugh that made everyone around her smile. Michael was the perfect mix of both of us, inheriting her warm brown eyes and my stubbornness. Our weekends were spent at local parks, community pools, or working on small projects around the house. We were building the kind of life most people dream about, one day at a time. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October. Michael had just started 2nd grade. Sarah was driving home from a parent-teacher conference when a drunk driver crossed the center line. The police said she died instantly. Just like that, our perfect little world was shattered. I still remember sitting 7-year-old Michael down that night, struggling to find words that could possibly explain why Mommy wasn't coming home. His small face crumpled in confusion, then pain, then tears that seemed endless. That night, as I held my sobbing son, I made him a promise I intended to keep for the rest of my life, that I would always be there for him, that he would never be alone. The first year was the hardest. I was drowning in grief while trying to keep Michael afloat. He would wake up crying, asking for his mom. I would find him sitting in Sarah's closet, surrounded by her clothes that still carried her scent. I was barely functioning myself, but I had to be strong for him. There were nights when I would put Michael to bed, then go to my room and silently break down only to pull myself together by morning. It soon became clear that my demanding job as an engineer wouldn't work with our new reality. The hours were long, there was frequent travel, and Michael needed stability more than ever. After much consideration, I made the decision to leave my promising career and take a position as a maintenance technician at a local manufacturing plant. The pay was significantly less, but the schedule was predictable, and I could be home when Michael got out of school. Even with the more flexible job, making ends meet was a challenge. To supplement our income, I picked up evening work delivering packages after Michael went to bed. I would leave him with our elderly neighbor Mrs. Jenkins, checking in by phone several times before returning home around midnight. Then I'd be up at 6 the next morning to get Michael ready for school. Despite the financial strain, I made sure Michael never felt deprived. When he wanted to join the soccer team, I found the money for cleats and uniforms. When his class went on field trips, I made sure he could participate. Birthday parties might have been modest compared to his friends, but they were always special with homemade cakes and carefully chosen gifts that I often worked overtime to afford. The exhaustion was constant, but seeing Michael smile made every sacrifice worthwhile. I learned to be both mother and father, figuring out how to talk about everything from school bullies to puberty. YouTube became my secret weapon, teaching me how to properly iron dress shirts for school pictures and how to help with increasingly complex homework assignments. As Michael entered his teenage years, our bond grew even stronger. We developed little traditions like Sunday morning pancakes and Friday movie nights. He started to excel in school, particularly in math and economics. I encouraged his interests, often going to the library with him to check out books on investing and business that were well beyond his grade level. I never dated after Sarah died. Several well-meaning friends tried to set me up over the years, but I always declined. It wasn't just about loyalty to Sarah, though I still wore my wedding ring for many years. It was also about priorities. Between work and raising Michael, there simply wasn't time or energy for dating. Besides, I worried how a new relationship might affect him. Our little family of two had found its balance, and I was hesitant to disrupt that. By the time Michael was preparing for college, I had been working multiple jobs for nearly a decade. My body felt the strain with chronic back pain from years of physical labor and too little rest. But watching Michael open his acceptance letter to Wharton Business School made every ache worthwhile. His scholarship covered about half the tuition, a testament to his hard work and brilliance. For the rest, I had my savings carefully accumulated over years of tight budgeting. Even with the scholarship and savings financing, an Ivy League education was a challenge. I took out a second mortgage on our house and picked up additional weekend work. Michael offered to choose a less expensive school, but I wouldn't hear of it. This was his dream, and I was determined to make it happen. I told him to focus on his studies and make the most of this opportunity. I would handle the financial side. College was the first time we had lived apart, and I missed him terribly. Our daily calls gradually became weekly as he immersed himself in campus life. I was thrilled that he was making friends and thriving academically, even as I returned to an empty house each night. During school breaks, he would come home, filling the house with stories about professors, internships, and the future he was building. Michael graduated with honors, landing a prestigious position at Goldman Sachs. I had never been prouder than when I watched him walk across that stage in his cap and gown. He was the first in our family to graduate from college, let alone an Ivy League university. As he moved to New York to start his career, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Despite the hardships, despite raising him alone, Michael had become an exceptional young man. I believed our relationship was unshakable, built on years of shared sacrifice and unconditional love. For a while, things were wonderful. Michael called regularly, came home for holidays, and even sent money to help with the mortgage. He seemed genuinely grateful for everything I had done. When he was promoted after just 2 years at the firm, he flew me to New York to celebrate. We toured the city, ate at fancy restaurants I could never afford, and talked late into the night in his sleek downtown apartment. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the reward for all those years of hard work. My son is successful, happy, and we remain close. I had no idea that everything was about to change. Michael met Jessica at a charity gala in New York. He called me the next day, uncharacteristically excited about this woman he had just met. Jessica Hampton, he explained, was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also came from one of the city's most prominent families. Her parents owned Hampton Luxury Hotels, a chain of 5-star properties across the country. Michael sounded almost in awe as he described her Harvard education, her job at a prestigious art gallery, and her social connections. While I was happy to hear the excitement in his voice, I felt an unexpected twinge of concern. Michael had always been grounded, valuing hard work and authenticity over status. Now he seemed captivated by Jessica's wealth and social position as much as by Jessica herself. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. My son was an adult, and it wasn't my place to judge his choice of partner based on a single phone call. 3 months later, Michael invited me to New York to meet Jessica. I took time off work, bought a new shirt I couldn't really afford, and boarded the train with equal measures of excitement and nervousness. The restaurant Michael had chosen was intimidatingly upscale, the kind of place where I immediately felt out of place in my department store clothes and worn shoes. Jessica was objectively beautiful with perfectly styled blonde hair and an outfit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. She greeted me with a rehearsed smile and air kisses that never made contact with my cheeks. Throughout dinner, she asked polite questions about my life, but seemed to wince slightly at my answers about working in maintenance and package delivery. I tried to warm up to her, to see what had captivated my son. She was certainly intelligent and well-spoken, but there was a subtle condescension in her manner, a barely perceptible curl of her lip when I mispronounced the name of a wine, a quick exchange of glances with Michael when I used the wrong fork. Most concerning was how Michael seemed different around her, more conscious of appearances, less like the authentic young man I had raised. 2 weeks later, Michael called to say they were engaged. The whirlwind romance had culminated in a proposal at her family's estate in the Hamptons. Before I could fully process this news, he was explaining that the wedding would be in just 4 months at the Hamptons flagship hotel in Miami. When I expressed surprise at the rushed timeline, he hesitated before admitting that Jessica's parents had insisted on a quick ceremony to coincide with the opening of their newest property. I finally met Gregory and Samantha Hampton at the engagement dinner they hosted at their Manhattan penthouse. The apartment itself was overwhelming with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park original artwork on every wall and staff who moved silently through the rooms, refilling glasses and offering appetizers. Gregory Hampton was a tall, imposing man who assessed me with a quick glance before offering a limp handshake and immediately turning his attention back to his business associates. It was clear I did not register as someone worthy of his time. Samantha, however, was more direct in her disdain. "So you're Michael's father," she said, looking me up and down as if appraising a questionable purchase. "Michael tells us you work in maintenance. How quaint." The way she emphasized the word made it clear it was not a compliment. "We've always taught Jessica the value of respecting people from all walks of life." I swallowed my pride and smiled. I've always believed honest work is nothing to be ashamed of. I'm very proud of Michael and what he's accomplished. "Yes, well, he's certainly come a long way," she replied, emphasizing the distance between my world and his current status. "We're pleased he's found his place in a more appropriate circle now." Throughout the evening, Samantha made similar comments, each one delivered with a smile, but carrying a clear message. I was an embarrassing reminder of Michael's humble beginnings. A chapter best forgotten now that he was entering their world. What hurt more than her comments was Michael's reaction. Rather than defending me, he seemed almost apologetic about my presence, quickly changing the subject whenever my work or our home was mentioned. As the wedding approached, I found myself increasingly sidelined. The Hamptons had hired a high-profile wedding planner who organized everything from Miami. Michael would call with updates, but it was clear all decisions had already been made by Jessica and her parents. My role was simply to show up in the tuxedo they would provide and follow the instructions I would be given. The wedding itself was a 3-day extravaganza at the Hampton Ocean Royale, their newest luxury property. I arrived feeling like an imposter in the opulent surroundings. At the rehearsal dinner, I was seated at a table far from the main party, with distant relatives and colleagues who seemed equally out of place. When it came time for toasts, Gregory gave a lengthy speech about welcoming Michael into their family legacy. I had prepared my own toast, but the program moved on before I was invited to speak. The ceremony took place on the hotel's private beach at sunset. It was undeniably beautiful, but as I watched my son pledge his life to Jessica, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him to a world where I didn't belong. At the reception, I danced one obligatory dance with Jessica, made small talk with guests who clearly had no interest in knowing me, and returned to my room earlier than most. Michael barely noticed my departure, caught up in the celebration and his new family. After the wedding, the distance between us grew. Michael and Jessica moved into a luxury apartment purchased for them by her parents as a wedding gift. Our weekly calls became monthly, then sporadic. When we did speak, Michael was always busy, distracted, rushing between meetings or social engagements. He would promise to visit soon, but something always came up: a business trip or a vacation with Jessica's family. I tried to bridge the gap, suggesting I come to New York instead. Michael would hesitate, checking his and Jessica's schedules, ultimately finding a lunch slot on a Tuesday when I would have to take unpaid time off work and spend money I didn't have on a train ticket. These lunches were hurried affairs, with Michael constantly checking his phone. Our conversations staying safely on the surface of our lives. 6 months after the wedding, I was shocked to learn from Facebook that Michael and Jessica had bought a house in Greenwich, Connecticut. My son had moved to a new home without even telling me. When I called to congratulate him and ask for the address, he seemed embarrassed, making excuses about how busy they'd been with the move. I offered to visit and help with unpacking or yard work, but he quickly explained that they had staff for that. A month later, I received a formal invitation to a housewarming party. I spent money I couldn't spare on a nice bottle of wine, and a houseplant took the train to Connecticut, and then a taxi to their address. The house turned out to be a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and a circular driveway filled with luxury cars. Inside, at least 50 guests in expensive clothing mingled over champagne and catered appetizers. Michael greeted me briefly before being pulled away by Jessica to meet someone important. I wandered through rooms filled with strangers until I found Samantha Hampton holding court in the kitchen, regaling guests with stories about the decorator she had hired for the young couple. "Billy," she said when she spotted me using my name for the first time. "Come join us. I was just telling everyone how Jessica saved this place. You wouldn't believe the outdated fixtures and finishes the previous owners had installed. Thank goodness Michael married someone with taste, or who knows what this place would look like." Several guests laughed, and one woman added, "Not everyone has an eye for quality." "So true," Samantha agreed, glancing pointedly at my off-the-rack suit. "Some people just never learn the difference between price and value." I excused myself and spent the rest of the evening trying to find moments to connect with Michael, who was always surrounded by Jessica's friends or business associates. When I finally left, he walked me to the taxi, apologizing for not spending more time with me. "It's a crazy time, Dad," he said, checking his watch. "But we'll have you over properly soon when things settle down." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing my hurt. As the taxi pulled away, I watched my son return to his new life, wondering where I fit in it anymore. The first real sign that things had fundamentally changed came when Michael's birthday approached. For years, even after he moved to New York, we had maintained the tradition of spending his birthday together. I would travel to him or he would come home, but we always made it work. This year I called to confirm our plans, only to have Michael sound confused. "Oh, Dad, I meant to call you about that. Jessica's planned a surprise trip to Bora Bora for my birthday week. We're leaving on Wednesday." "I see," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Well, maybe we could celebrate early. I could come up this weekend." There was an awkward pause. Actually, this weekend is pretty packed. We have the Thompsons' charity gala on Saturday and Sunday. We're having brunch with Jessica's college friends. He sighed. Look, it's just a busy time. We'll figure something out when I get back, okay? We never did figure it out. When they returned from Bora, there was a work crisis, then Jessica's family obligations, then a spontaneous trip to Europe. My birthday passed with just a text message from Michael, sent at 11:58 p.m. as if remembered at the last minute. The cancelled plans and forgotten dates accumulated. I would see photos on social media of Michael attending events or vacationing in exotic locations, while my calls went unanswered. When we did connect, he was always rushing, distracted, or putting me on speakerphone while multitasking. Our conversations became increasingly superficial, focusing on weather and general pleasantries rather than anything meaningful. I tried to maintain the connection, sending thoughtful cards for holidays, asking specific questions about his work and life, suggesting dates for visits months in advance to accommodate his busy schedule. But for every effort I made, there seemed to be less and less reciprocation. It was as if my son was slowly fading away, replaced by someone who viewed our relationship as an obligation rather than a bond. The most painful moments came when I was included in events with Jessica's family. Thanksgiving at the Hamptons country estate was an excruciating exercise in feeling out of place. Samantha seated me at the far end of the table, away from Michael, who was positioned prominently between Jessica and Gregory. Throughout the meal, Samantha made references to proper holiday traditions as opposed to the simple celebrations Michael must have grown up with. Michael tells us you usually had store-bought pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving dessert, she announced to the table with a laugh. Isn't that charming? We've always had our chef prepare at least 5 different dessert options. I can't imagine limiting oneself to just one generic option. I wanted to explain that those store-bought pies were purchased after working double shifts, that Michael and I would eat them while watching football games together, creating memories and traditions that meant something despite their simplicity. Instead, I smiled tightly and focused on my plate. Later that evening, I overheard Samantha speaking to her sister in the hallway outside the guest bathroom. The father is a bit of an anchor, isn't he? So terribly working class. I worry about genetics, to be honest. If Jessica and Michael have children, will they inherit that sort of well-ordinariness? Her sister laughed. At least Jessica can make sure they're raised with proper values and opportunities. Thank goodness Michael found his way out of that background. I stood frozen, the pain of their words radiating through me. It wasn't just the insult to me, but the implication that my parenting, my values, the life I had built for Michael, were something to be overcome and forgotten, rather than respected. When I returned to the living room, Michael was deep in conversation with Gregory about investment opportunities, while Jessica showed photos from their recent trip to Paris on her phone. No one noticed as I slipped outside to the expansive patio, seeking a moment alone to collect myself. Jessica found me there 20 minutes later. There you are, she said, her tone suggesting mild annoyance. Michael was wondering where you'd gone. Just getting some air, I replied. She studied me for a moment. You know, Billy, these gatherings can be a bit overwhelming for people who aren't used to them. If you ever feel uncomfortable, you don't have to stay for the entire event. We'd understand. The message was clear. My presence was tolerated, not desired. I nodded, not trusting myself to respond without revealing the hurt her words caused. Jessica gave me a practiced smile and returned inside, leaving me alone with the realization that in their world, I would always be an outsider. The strain between Michael and me grew more pronounced with each interaction. When I would mention memories from his childhood or ask about his work in specific terms, he would become impatient, changing the subject or finding reasons to end our conversation. It was as if he wanted to keep me in a separate compartment of his life, disconnected from who he had become. One particularly difficult moment came when I attended a work dinner as Michael's guest. Throughout the evening, he introduced me to colleagues not as my father, but as Billy, offering no explanation of our relationship. When one curious co-worker asked directly how we knew each other, Michael hesitated before reluctantly clarifying. The co-worker seemed surprised, commenting, "Wow, I never would have guessed. You two seem so different." Rather than acknowledge our bond or share any of the story of how I had raised him alone, Michael simply nodded and steered the conversation elsewhere. I felt invisible, my role in his life minimized to the point of erasure. As Christmas approached, I dared to hope things might improve. The holidays had always been special for us, a time when, despite limited means, I had made sure Michael experienced the magic of the season. I still had boxes of homemade ornaments he had created in elementary school saved carefully over the years. When Michael called to invite me to spend Christmas at their Connecticut home, I felt a surge of optimism. Perhaps this would be an opportunity to reconnect, to remind him of our history and the depth of our relationship. I asked if I should bring any of our old decorations, the ones with sentimental value from his childhood. "Oh, that won't be necessary," he replied quickly. "Jessica has worked with a designer on the Christmas decor. Everything is already perfect. Just bring yourself." Despite this lukewarm response, I spent weeks searching for meaningful gifts for everyone. For Michael, I saved up to buy an expensive watch that cost $1,200, more than a month's worth of my salary. Though it wasn't as luxurious as the ones I knew he now wore, it was engraved with a personal message about time and love between father and son. For Jessica, I created a beautiful photo album chronicling Michael's childhood, thinking she might appreciate seeing this side of her husband. And even for the Hamptons, despite their treatment of me, I purchased nice gifts, an artisan whiskey for Gregory, and a handmade scarf from a local artist for Samantha. I arrived at their house on Christmas Eve, heart full of hope for a meaningful holiday together. But from the moment I stepped through the door, it was clear I was an afterthought in their celebration. The guest room prepared for me was in the furthest corner of the house, while Samantha and Gregory had been given the main guest suite adjacent to Michael and Jessica's room. That evening, as we gathered in the living room, surrounded by perfectly coordinated decorations that bore no trace of Michael's history, Samantha dominated the conversation with stories about Christmases at exclusive resorts and the extravagant gifts exchanged in their family. When I attempted to share a memory of Michael's excitement over a second-hand bicycle I had restored for him when he was 10, Samantha smoothly interrupted. "Speaking of gifts," she announced, "I can hardly wait for tomorrow. I've been absolutely bursting to see everyone's reactions." She gave Michael a knowing look that left me feeling there was a subtext I wasn't privy to. I went to bed that night with a growing sense of unease, yet still clinging to the hope that Christmas Day might somehow bridge the widening gap between my son and me. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Michael and Jessica's grand home. I woke early, a habit from decades of working morning shifts, and made my way downstairs to the kitchen. To my surprise, Samantha was already there, directing the housekeeper on how to prepare breakfast. "Good morning, Billy," she said with the artificial warmth I'd come to recognize. "I hope you slept well in the West Wing. It's the quietest part of the house, though perhaps a bit isolated." "I slept fine, thank you," I replied, pouring myself coffee from the elaborate machine that had taken me several minutes to figure out. "We'll be opening gifts after breakfast," she informed me. It's a Hampton tradition to start the day with a proper meal together. The implication that whatever traditions Michael and I might have had were less proper hung in the air between us. By 9, everyone had gathered around the massive dining table. Gregory was absorbed in his phone, occasionally barking instructions to someone on his staff. Jessica and Michael sat close together, whispering and smiling in their matching monogrammed pajamas. I felt conspicuously out of place in my plain flannel sleep pants and t-shirt. The breakfast was elaborate, catered by staff who moved silently around us, refilling glasses and replacing empty platters. Conversation flowed around me, rather than including me, focused on people I didn't know and events I hadn't attended. When I tried to contribute, my comments were met with polite smiles, before the discussion quickly returned to its previous track. It was like being a ghost at my own family gathering, visible but not quite present. After breakfast, we moved to the living room, where an enormous tree dominated the space, surrounded by expertly wrapped packages in coordinating paper and ribbons. My own gifts, wrapped in paper from the dollar store, stood out awkwardly among them. I had placed them under the tree the night before, feeling a twinge of embarrassment at their humble appearance, but hoping the thought behind them would matter more than their presentation. Michael appointed himself as Santa, distributing gifts one by one. He started with Jessica presenting her with a small box that turned out to contain diamond earrings that made her squeal with delight. Next came several gifts for Gregory, including an expensive bottle of scotch and a leather golf bag. Samantha received a designer handbag that caused her to clutch her chest dramatically and declare Michael the most thoughtful son-in-law a mother could ask for. My stomach tightened as I watched each extravagant gift being opened. The presents I had brought, selected with care but constrained by my budget, seemed increasingly inadequate. When Michael finally handed me a small, lightweight package, I tried to mask my disappointment at its obvious insignificance. I unwrapped it carefully, aware of eyes on me. Inside was a fleece blanket in a generic blue color, the kind sold in discount bins during holiday sales. The clearance sticker was still attached to the plastic packaging, $4.99. Thanks, I managed, forcing a smile as I looked up at Michael, searching his face for any sign that he recognized the thoughtlessness of the gift. But he had already moved on, announcing that there was one more surprise before heading out to the garage. We all followed, though. I moved slowly, still processing what had just happened. Had my son really given me the father who raised him alone and sacrificed everything for him? A $5 clearance blanket, while lavishing expensive gifts on his in-laws. When Michael dramatically raised the garage door, Samantha's reaction was immediate and loud. There sat a brand new BMW sedan with a massive red bow on top. The car had to be worth at least $50,000, possibly much more. "Oh my God!" Samantha shrieked, rushing forward to run her hand along the shiny black paint. "Michael, Jessica, you shouldn't have..." Michael beamed, handing her the keys. "Only the best for our favorite mother. We knew your current car was almost 3 years old, practically ancient by your standards." Samantha embraced Michael tightly. "My wonderful son," she declared, emphasizing the word in a way that felt deliberate, a claim of ownership that erased my role entirely. "You've made this the best Christmas ever." I stood frozen, the contrast between my $5 blanket and this luxury vehicle hitting me like a physical blow. In that moment, the truth I had been avoiding for years became impossible to deny. I had become irrelevant in my son's life, an obligation to be managed rather than a parent to be cherished. As everyone continued to exclaim over the car, I quietly returned to the living room, setting aside the blanket and gathering my composure. When they came back inside, flushed with excitement, I offered my congratulations on the generous gift, determined not to show how deeply I was hurting. "Now for the rest of the presents," Michael announced, seemingly oblivious to my pain. He distributed more gifts, each one reinforcing the message of the first Jessica received: designer clothes and jewelry. Gregory got premium whiskey and golf equipment, and Samantha unwrapped cashmere sweaters and luxury spa certificates. When it came time for them to open my gifts, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Michael unwrapped the watch with barely concealed disappointment, thanking me with a distracted air, before setting it aside without even reading the engraving. Jessica flipped through the photo album quickly, making polite noises about how interesting it was to see these old pictures before placing it on a bottom shelf. Gregory and Samantha barely acknowledged the gifts I had carefully selected, offering cursory thanks before returning their attention to their real presents. The rest of the day passed in a blur of elaborate meals, phone calls from Jessica's extended family, and continuous references to the BMW that now sat proudly in the driveway. I went through the motions, smiling when appropriate, answering questions when asked. But inside, I felt hollow, erased a ghost at the feast of my son's new life. That evening, as Michael and Jessica prepared for a neighbor's Christmas party, I announced that I wasn't feeling well and would stay behind. "Are you sure, Dad?" Michael asked, though his tone suggested relief rather than concern. "It's going to be quite the event. The Morgans always go all out." "I'm sure," I replied. "Just need some rest." As they prepared to leave, dressed in expensive evening wear, and discussing which luxury gifts to show off. First, I retreated to my isolated guest room. There, surrounded by elegant but impersonal decor, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My son, the boy I had raised alone, had relegated me to an afterthought in his life. The $5 blanket wasn't just a thoughtless gift. It was a message about my value in his new world. I spent hours sitting in that room, revisiting memories of Michael's childhood. The Christmases when I had worked double shifts to afford the toys he wanted. The school plays I had never missed despite exhaustion. The countless nights helping with homework, bandaging scraped knees, chasing away nightmares. 28 years of unconditional love and sacrifice reduced to a clearance item, while his mother-in-law received a luxury car. By morning, I had made a decision. I could not continue to accept this treatment, to be a silent witness to my own erasure. For the first time in my life, I needed to put myself first to reclaim my dignity, even if it meant stepping away from the relationship I had cherished above all others. I packed my bag quietly, wrote a brief note explaining that I needed to leave early due to not feeling well, and called a taxi. As I waited for it in the driveway, staring at the BMW, with its ostentatious bow, I felt a strange sense of clarity breaking through the pain. Whatever relationship Michael and I would have going forward, it could no longer be one where I accepted scraps of attention while his in-laws received the best of him. The taxi arrived, and I left without saying goodbye, the $5 blanket still sitting unwrapped in their living room. I had given Michael my whole heart for 28 years. It was time to take back the pieces he no longer valued. The taxi ride from Greenwich back to the train station gave me time to think. As the affluent neighborhoods gave way to more modest surroundings, I felt the first stirrings of something beyond hurt, something approaching resolve. By the time I boarded the train home, I knew what I needed to do. For decades, my identity had been defined by being Michael's father. Every decision, every sacrifice had been made with his welfare in mind. Now I needed to rediscover who Billy Robertson was, apart from that role. Not just for my own sake, but because continuing to accept Michael's dismissive treatment would only enable the person he was becoming, someone who measured relationships by material value rather than emotional connection. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a strange limbo. Michael called once, leaving a voicemail that sounded more annoyed than concerned about my early departure. "Dad, Jessica and I were surprised to find you gone this morning. Hope you're feeling better. Let me know if you need anything." No apology, no acknowledgement of the $5 blanket compared to the $50,000 car, just a perfunctory check-in. I didn't return the call. Instead, I spent those days reflecting on our relationship, revisiting old photo albums and keepsakes I had saved from throughout Michael's life. The construction paper Father's Day cards from elementary school, the Eagle Scout badge I had proudly pinned on his uniform, the graduation tassels from high school and college. Each item represented a milestone in his journey, but also in mine as a father who had done everything possible to raise a good man. Had I made mistakes along the way? Undoubtedly. Perhaps I had indulged him too much, eager to compensate for the absence of his mother. Maybe I had emphasized achievement over character in ways I hadn't recognized. Or possibly this change had nothing to do with my parenting at all, but was simply the result of Michael being seduced by wealth and status after growing up with neither. On December 30th, I called my oldest friend, Ray, who had known me since before Sarah died. After listening to the whole story, he let out a long sigh. "Billy, I'm going to say something hard to hear. This isn't just about a cheap blanket versus an expensive car. This is about years of Michael taking you for granted, and you allowing it because you love him. At some point, loving someone means holding them accountable when they fail to live up to the values you taught them." His words stung, but they also resonated with what I had been feeling. So what do? You set boundaries. You make it clear that you deserve respect, not as a reward for your sacrifices, but as a basic human dignity. And you do it in a way that gives Michael a chance to recognize what he's done and make amends if he chooses to. That night I made a decision. I would give Michael one opportunity to understand the depth of his disregard, not through angry confrontation, but by showing him the truth about our shared history and the consequences of his choices. I spent New Year's Eve assembling a special package. In a sturdy wooden box that had once held Sarah's keepsakes, I carefully placed items that told the story of our life together. First, a copy of Sarah's death certificate and the program from her funeral reminders of where our journey as father and son truly began. Next, a folder containing financial records, copies of the second mortgage I had taken to pay for his education, bank statements, showing withdrawals for his tuition payments, and the loan documents I was still paying off. These weren't meant as a guilt trip, but as evidence of priorities and values. I included several childhood mementos, the baseball glove I had repaired countless times, rather than replacing the well-worn copy of The Hobbit we had read together during his chickenpox quarantine photos from camping trips taken in lieu of expensive vacations. From his college years, I added the congratulatory card I had sent with my last $100 that month, the bus tickets from visits I had made, despite working double shifts before and after, and a printed email where he had thanked me for making his education possible. Finally, I placed the $5 blanket on top now, a symbol of how far we had drifted apart. With these items, I included a letter. It wasn't angry or accusatory, but honest about my feelings and clear about my boundaries going forward. I explained that I would always love him as my son, but could no longer participate in a relationship where I was treated as an obligation rather than a valued parent. I told him I would be taking time away to focus on my own well-being, and that any future relationship would need to be built on mutual respect. I ended by returning the blanket, writing that while the monetary value of a gift had never mattered to me, the thought behind it did, and this gift had shown exactly how little thought I warranted in his new life. On New Year's Eve, as others celebrated fresh starts with champagne and parties, I drove to Greenwich one last time. The Hamptons cars were gone, confirming they were at one of the lavish parties Jessica had mentioned. I placed my box on their doorstep, rang the bell once and drove away, uncertain if I would ever speak to my son again. When I returned home, I made 3 difficult but necessary decisions. I blocked Michael's number on my phone, disconnected from all social media where I might see updates about his life, and informed mutual friends that I didn't want to discuss him for the foreseeable future. Then I sat alone in my quiet house, surrounded by memories of the boy I had raised and mourning the loss of the relationship I had believed would sustain me through my later years. It was the hardest New Year's Eve of my life, more painful even than the first one after Sarah died. Then at least Michael and I had faced our grief together. Now I faced an uncertain future alone. But mixed with the grief was something unexpected, a quiet sense of self-respect that had been missing for too long. For the first time in decades, I had put my own dignity first. Whatever happened next would be built on that foundation, not on the crumbling remains of a relationship where I had accepted less than I deserved. The days following my delivery of the box were filled with a strange mixture of grief and liberation. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from Michael, each marked with his blocked caller ID. I maintained my resolve, ignoring them all, though each alert sent a jolt of emotion through me. Was he angry? Remorseful? Did the contents of the box make any impact at all? I forced myself not to speculate, focusing instead on reclaiming my life. I began by making small changes that symbolized bigger shifts in perspective. I rearranged furniture that had remained in the same positions since Michael was a child. I replaced the worn recliner where I had spent countless nights watching his sports events on TV. I cleared shelves of participation trophies and childhood art projects, storing some and donating others. It wasn't about erasing Michael from my home, but about creating space for myself after decades of orienting my entire existence around being his father. Who was Billy Robertson besides Michael's dad? It was time to find out. A week into January, Ray invited me to join a community basketball league for men over 50. My initial reaction was to decline, citing work commitments. But then I realized those excuses had always been about keeping my schedule open for Michael. With that obligation removed, I was free to pursue my own interests. I joined the league, rediscovering a love for the game I had played in high school but abandoned after becoming a father. 2 weeks later, Michael showed up at my house unannounced. I watched through the window as he pounded on the door, looking increasingly frustrated as I didn't answer. He left a handwritten note pushed under the door, which I retrieved but didn't read, placing it unopened in a drawer. This wasn't about punishing him, but about maintaining the boundaries I had established until I was emotionally ready for contact. As January turned to February, I began seriously considering a change I'd contemplated for years, selling the family home. The house had served its purpose as a stable environment to raise Michael. But now it was too large for one person and filled with complicated memories. More practically selling would allow me to pay off the remaining second mortgage and perhaps have enough left to start fresh, somewhere more affordable. I contacted a realtor and listed the house without telling anyone connected to Michael. Within 2 weeks, I had an offer from a young couple expecting their first child. As I signed the paperwork, I felt a wave of melancholy, but also anticipation. This house had been the setting for one chapter of my life. It was time to write another. By March, I had found a small one-bedroom condo in a neighboring state close enough to maintain my job, but far enough to feel like a genuine fresh start. I began the process of sorting through 3 decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to discard. It was both physically and emotionally exhausting work, each item carrying memories that had to be confronted. During this time, Michael's attempts to contact me continued, but became less frequent. He left messages with mutual friends, asking about my welfare and expressing confusion about my extreme reaction. These friends, respecting my wishes, simply told him I was doing fine, but needed space. None mentioned my impending move. Ray helped me pack up the house loading boxes into a rented truck on a rainy Saturday in April. As we worked, he handed me a folded newspaper clipping. "Thought you should see this," he said cautiously. "It's about Michael." The article was from the business section of a national newspaper featuring Michael and Jessica at a charity gala. The caption noted that they had recently separated with Jessica, filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The photo showed Michael looking thinner than I remembered, his smile forced for the cameras. I folded the clipping and put it aside without comment. Whatever was happening in Michael's life, I needed to maintain my boundaries until I was stronger, until our potential relationship could be based on mutual respect rather than obligation or crisis. By May, I was settled in my new home, a modest but comfortable condo in a community with other residents primarily in their 50s and 60s. I joined a local book club, volunteered at a youth center, teaching basic carpentry skills, and even went on a few casual dates arranged by new friends. It wasn't the retirement I had envisioned surrounded by family and grandchildren, but it offered a different kind of contentment, one based on self-respect and authentic connections. In June, 6 months after leaving the box on Michael's doorstep, I received a letter forwarded through Ray. The envelope contained no return address, but I recognized Michael's handwriting immediately. Unlike his previous note, I chose to read this one, sensing it might be important for my own healing process. The letter was 10 pages long, handwritten, with visible tear stains on some pages. Michael began by acknowledging receipt of the box and its profound impact on him. He described sitting alone on New Year's Day, going through each item, and finally understanding the magnitude of what I had sacrificed and how completely he had failed to honor that. He wrote about the months since then, how my absence had forced him to examine his choices and values. He described the dissolution of his marriage, explaining that after my departure, he had begun to see Jessica and her family through new eyes, recognizing patterns of materialism and status-seeking that he had not only accepted, but embraced. Their separation had been mutual, both acknowledging they had married for the wrong reasons. Michael detailed his efforts to find me, his increasing desperation, as he discovered I had sold the house and disappeared from our hometown. He expressed regret for the $5 blanket, calling it the most shameful moment of my life, and explaining that it had been a last-minute purchase when he realized he had been so focused on impressing the Hamptons that he had neglected to buy anything meaningful for me. The final pages contained no excuses, only an apology that acknowledged the full scope of his behavior over the years, and a request not for forgiveness, but for the opportunity to begin rebuilding trust. He ended by saying he would respect whatever decision I made, including continuing no contact, but hoped someday I might be willing to meet and start a new kind of relationship, one based on genuine appreciation and equality. Included with the letter was a single airplane ticket to New York, open, dated with a note saying, "If you ever decide you're ready to talk, this will bring you here. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door if you choose to walk through it." I read the letter 3 times that evening, emotions washing over me in waves. Anger at the years of disregard, sadness for the relationship we had lost, a cautious hope that perhaps something new might be possible, but also a clear-eyed recognition that words, however heartfelt, were not the same as sustained actions. I placed the letter and ticket in a drawer, not ready to make a decision yet. The past 6 months had taught me to trust my own judgment, to move at my own pace rather than rushing to accommodate others. If Michael was serious about change, he would understand that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort, and if he wasn't, then I had already proven to myself that I could create a meaningful life without him. As summer turned to fall, I continued establishing my new normal. I was promoted at work, recognition of skills and experience that had often been overlooked when I was constantly arranging my schedule around Michael's needs. I expanded my volunteer work, finding unexpected fulfillment in mentoring young people, particularly boys without father figures. I even adopted an elderly dog from a shelter, providing companionship for us both in our later years. In October, exactly 10 months after that painful Christmas, I finally felt ready to respond to Michael's letter. I wrote my own shorter, but equally honest acknowledging his apology and explaining the journey I had taken since our estrangement. I made no promises about the future, but expressed willingness to begin a limited correspondence that might over time lead to more direct contact. I mailed the letter to the address he had included, uncertain what would come of it. 2 weeks later, I received a response, not a desperate plea for immediate reconciliation, but a respectful acknowledgement of my boundaries and gratitude for the opportunity to communicate at all. It was a small thing, but significant. The Michael I had known a year ago would have pushed for more, faster. This restraint suggested genuine change. Over the following months, we exchanged letters regularly, rebuilding a connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. He shared details of his life post-divorce, including therapy to address patterns stemming from his mother's death and his complicated feelings about wealth and status. I wrote about my new community, my volunteer work, and my gradual journey towards self-rediscovery. By Christmas, a year after the $5 blanket, I felt ready for more. I booked the ticket Michael had sent arranging to visit New York for a day trip, a brief meeting in neutral territory. When I stepped off the train at Grand Central, he was waiting, looking both familiar and changed, more like the son I had raised than the stranger he had become. Our reunion wasn't dramatic, no running into each other's arms or tearful declarations. Instead, it was coffee at a quiet cafe conversation that was sometimes awkward, but always honest, and a tentative agreement to continue rebuilding step by careful step. When we parted that evening, Michael handed me a small wrapped package. "It's not expensive," he said quickly, "but it's thoughtful. I hope that matters more now." Inside was a handmade wooden frame containing a photo of us from my college graduation, the last time we had both been truly present and connected before wealth and status had complicated our relationship. The frame was inscribed with a simple message: "New beginnings are built on honoring the past." It wasn't perfect. There was still hurt to process, trust to rebuild, patterns to change on both sides. But as I returned home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that my relationship with my son might evolve into something authentic and mutually respectful, not defined by what we could give each other materially. but by the love and understanding that had once been our foundation. 2 years have passed since that fateful Christmas morning, when a $5 blanket revealed the true state of my relationship with my son. The journey since then has been neither straight nor easy, but it has led to places I never expected to find. My new life in the condo community has blossomed beyond what I could have imagined. What began as a refuge has become a true home filled with friendships and activities that bring genuine joy. The community garden plot I tentatively took on has expanded to coordinating the entire garden project. My carpentry classes at the youth center now have a waiting list, with former students returning to mentor newcomers. Max, my adopted senior dog, has become the unofficial mascot of our condo complex, greeting neighbors on our daily walks with his dignified gray muzzle and wagging tail. Most surprisingly, I met Eleanor, a retired librarian, who moved into the unit across from mine last year. Our friendship evolved slowly into something deeper, both of us cautious after years alone. At 62, I never expected to find romantic companionship again, but Eleanor's warmth, intelligence, and quiet strength have brought a new dimension to my life. We're taking things slowly, both valuing our independence while enjoying the comfort of having someone to share meals, conversations, and simple everyday moments. As for Michael, our relationship has undergone its own transformation. After our initial meeting in New York, we established a pattern of monthly visits, alternating between his location and mine. Each meeting built incrementally on the one before allowing us to gradually rebuild trust and understanding. 6 months into this process, Michael made a significant life change, leaving his high-pressure investment job to start a financial literacy program for underserved communities. The salary cut was substantial, but as he explained, for the first time, I'm measuring success by impact rather than income. Watching him work with young people from backgrounds similar to his own childhood, I glimpsed again the values I had tried to instill in him. His relationship with Jessica ended in an amicable divorce, both acknowledging they had married for superficial reasons that couldn't sustain a lifelong partnership. More significantly, Michael gradually distanced himself from Samantha and Gregory Hampton, recognizing the toxic influence their materialistic values had exerted on him. This wasn't without cost, as they controlled many social and professional connections he had come to rely on. But he described the separation as like removing tinted glasses and seeing true colors for the first time. Our most meaningful conversation came last summer, during a weekend when Michael visited my new home. Sitting on my small patio as evening fell, he asked a question that clearly had been weighing on him. "Dad, do you think you'll ever fully forgive me for how I treated you?" I considered this carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Michael. It's a process that we're both still in. I've let go of the anger, but rebuilding trust takes time. What matters is that we're both committed to that process. He nodded, looking out at the community garden, where several of my neighbors were gathering vegetables for dinner. I still don't understand how I became that person. The one who could give his mother-in-law a BMW and his father a $5 blanket. It's like looking back at a stranger. We all have the capacity to lose our way, I said, especially when we're searching for acceptance in the wrong places. What defines us isn't the mistakes we make, but how we respond when those mistakes are revealed. I'm still ashamed, he admitted, not just of the blanket, but of all the years I gradually pushed you aside for people who only valued what I could give them or how I could advance their status. That shame serves a purpose if it helps you make different choices going forward, I told him. But at some point you have to let it go. I raised you to be a good man, Michael. You lost sight of that for a while, but you found your way back. That's what matters now. As for Samantha Hampton, I heard through Michael that she expressed neither remorse nor insight when confronted about her role in our estrangement. Some people, as Eleanor wisely observed, are so invested in external validation that they never develop the capacity for self-reflection. Her loss ultimately was greater than mine. I lost a son temporarily and regained a more authentic relationship. She lost a genuine connection, permanently, left only with superficial relationships based on status and material exchange. This Christmas was markedly different from the one that changed everything 2 years ago. Michael came to visit Eleanor and me at the condo, bringing homemade cookies rather than expensive gifts. We attended the community holiday concert together, where I played guitar in the senior ensemble, something I had taken up only since moving here. Afterwards, we exchanged thoughtful, modest presents that reflected actual knowledge of each other's lives and interests. Michael gave me a custom toolbox for the carpentry classes I teach, handcrafted by one of his financial literacy students who had discovered a talent for woodworking. I gave him a restored pocket watch that had belonged to my father, along with the family history I had researched since our reconciliation began. The monetary value of these gifts was irrelevant compared to the thought and meaning behind them. As I reflect on this journey, I recognize that leaving that box on Michael's doorstep and walking away was both the hardest and best decision I have ever made. It wasn't about punishment or revenge, but about finally acknowledging my own worth and refusing to participate in relationships that diminished it. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do both for ourselves and others is to establish boundaries that demand respect and authenticity. I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your sense of self, to build a life that honors your values rather than subordinating them to others' expectations. I've discovered that family can be both biological and chosen, that community can be found in unexpected places, and that new beginnings are possible at any age. Most importantly, I've come to understand that true gifts aren't measured by price tags, but by the thought effort and understanding they represent. A $5 blanket given without consideration can wound deeply, while a simple, thoughtful gesture can begin to heal years of hurt. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd like to ask, have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to maintain your self-respect? How did you balance setting boundaries with keeping the door open for reconciliation? I'd appreciate if you'd share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing a similar painful decision. Please subscribe if this resonated with you. Hit that like button if you found value in my journey, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to expect respect from those closest to you. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the most meaningful growth.